Good evening. Welcome to Live at 9 for the 1st of July 2009. Glad you've joined us. I hope you've been having a lovely day today and you're going to just have an enjoyable evening with us together. I've just been enjoying meeting my two guests. The whole subject we're going to be dealing tonight with is homeschooling. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? One of our guests is passionate, he says, about homeschooling. The other one's got some question marks about it. And so we're going to be talking about that later on in the program. We'll be coming on telephone. Jane Parks, that many of you obviously know as a presenter on Genesis and Revelation. She will be coming on. You will have the opportunity with texts and emails and phone calls to get involved as well. Let me introduce my guest, Dr. R.C. Sproul, Jr. We have to say Junior because your father is very famous.
I wouldn't say very.
Yeah,
in his own way.
Many people know the name anyway. So this is not the father, this is the son, this is Junior. Graduated from Grove City College, I'm told, in 1986, and Reformed Theological Seminary in 1991. And you received a Doctorate of Ministry degree in 2001. And you are passionate about homeschooling.
Absolutely right.
Great. My second guest is Robert C. Reach. Now, I had a whole wonderful list of recommendations concerning him and all that he was, and had some wonderful anecdotes, only to find you're not the person that I was told you were. But you're a great guy anyway. You're political science. You're political science at Stanford University.
Correct.
And you do have reservations about homeschooling.
Indeed.
So great to have you with. I've enjoyed chatting with you, first of all. But it's so good that I talked with my guests before we come on. Otherwise, you would have had this wonderful build-up to which you would have said, oh, no, I'm not. And I'm not sure where we would have gone after that. It's your birthday today.
That's
so
correct.
I hear a little
Happy
bird
birthday.
whispered in my 21 again.
That's right.
I will not sing happy birthday because we'll lose all our viewers the moment I do. But good. Enjoy this evening
Thank you.
with us. And I'm sorry if we'd have known, we'd have baked you a cake. But, let's begin. And let's begin with you, R.C. I mean, many of the... we're dealing very much with, for you guys, with the American scene. That's where you're at home with. Is there a major difference between, as you see, the whole education and the homeschooling in the American scene as to the British scene? Do you see major differences there?
I don't know that I would say that there are major differences. There certainly may be, each nation might be in a different place in what may be a natural progression on the issues. I know that very recently, here in the United Kingdom, a report was received that encouraged far greater oversight and involvement on the part of the state in homeschooling. And of course, in the United States, we have these kinds of decisions are made on a state-by-state basis. And by and large, overall, the states have moved past that kind of approach and are taking a more laissez-faire approach generally in the United States and moving away from the intrusion from the state, whereas it may be here that there's more intrusion
There's
coming.
certainly reports about it.
Yes.
We'll touch upon that when we get Jane on the line. But so yeah, the underneath it all, then there are real similarities, is what you're
Certainly,
saying.
I think that what motivates most homeschooling parents in the United States would be very similar to the kinds of things that might motivate homeschooling parents here as well.
Okay. Rob, maybe you could give us, to start with, some headlines as to why you have reservations over homeschooling. There's a number of these things we will take and develop, but if you can just give us some headlines to begin with.
Certainly. So the reservations I have about homeschooling are not about homeschooling as such. In other words, I do not think that homeschooling should be forbidden or banned. Rather, I think that the state, any state, the UK, the US, should impose strict regulations on homeschooling. So the reservations I have are in the US context to the practice of homeschooling in an unregulated context, where it is literally the case today, where in some states you simply, if you wish to homeschool, send an email or write a letter to the public authority saying that from now on we will be homeschooling Susie, and that is the end of the matter from the perspective of the state. They never hear from you again. There's no testing involved, no supervision involved with the curriculum, nothing. So my questions about homeschooling, my reservations about homeschooling revolve around the regulations. So now let me say two things about the regulations. There are two dimensions of reservations, I suppose is the best way to put it. The first concerns the development of citizenship in kids who are homeschooled, and the second concerns the claims that are made about the academic competency or progress of kids who are homeschooled. Let me take each in turn. The citizenship issue looks something like the following. There is no other educational environment in which parents are able to do the following except homeschooling. In homeschooling, parents can control where, when, with whom, and how their children are schooled. They can shield their children from exposure to beliefs that compete with those the parents would wish to expose their children to. They can determine wholly the encounters, physical and otherwise, that the children receive in schooling. And they can thereby prevent the kids from exposure to the vast world of diversity in a vibrant democracy, so that children can literally grow up insulated from exposure to and engagement with children who have very different beliefs, but who are, from the perspective of citizenship, they're equals.
Right.
So that's the civic concern. The academic concern is the following. It's just a straightforward empirical or social science question. How do kids in homeschools fare vis-a-vis or relative to kids in public schools? In the US, the claim is very often made that kids in homeschools do better than, or at least as well as, kids in public schools. And my claim is that that finding is completely unfounded. The studies that have been done to show, that purport to show this, are studies that would never pass muster in any academic or scholarly journal. They're studies performed by advocacy organizations that very carefully select a group of people to study with the ultimate goal of showing that there are positive gains from homeschooling. And my claim is that I don't wish to suggest that homeschools are necessarily poor environments in which academic achievement might happen, but that the claims made on behalf of homeschools in the US in particular are unfounded. And so the simple, straightforward answer is, how do kids in homeschools fare relative to kids in public schools? We have no idea.
Okay, I'm sure there's some points that you will want to respond to there, but first of all, can you do the same? Give us some headlines as to why you are passionate about homeschooling.
I'd be happy to. My passion for homeschooling is rooted and grounded in two things as well. One, my profound commitment to the authority of the Word of God over my life and over the life of my family. I'm at the end of the day, I believe in homeschooling because I believe that when the Scripture tells me in Deuteronomy chapter 6 that I'm to speak with my children of the things of God when they lie down and when they rise up, that this is part and parcel of the essence of what education is and what my calling is as a father. If you look at Psalm 78, where we're told that we're to teach our children these things of God and teach them to teach their children, again, very fundamental biblical calling about what it even means to be a parent. Moving into the New Testament, you have in Ephesians chapter 6, where children are called to obey their parents in the Lord, and fathers are told to raise their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. That Greek word translated nurture is rooted in the word paideia, which carries with it the idea of a culture. And so we're encouraged and called to raise our children in the culture of the Lord. And again, I think that means being rooted and grounded in the Word of God. So I want to be submissive to the Word of God. I want to be obedient to all that God commands me to. That's the first thing that drives that passion. The second thing is my deep and profound love for my children. You know, I want my children to receive the blessing of God. I want them to have full lives. As the scriptural language is, I want it to go well for them in the land. And again, I believe that means that they need to learn the things of God. And so out of my love for them, I have this passion, which, well, I guess, which also works out in this blessing. I want to be very clear that my commitment to homeschooling is not at the end of the day all about either higher test scores or even merely a sense of duty. But the blessing that I have in homeschooling, that my wife has in homeschooling, that the children have in homeschooling, is that it's a joy and a delight. This isn't some unpleasant thing that the Scripture asks us to do because, Jesus died for our sins and we kind of owe it to him. This is instead the fullness of the abundance of life that Jesus invites us to live together as families, together serving the Lord Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Great. We're open the text and the emails right now as we carry on and develop this, and we've already got one or two in for folks that know they can, but the text is 07781 472647, and the email is live@talkgod.com, and we'll get through as many of those as we can, and certainly we'll bring out, even if we can't bring out each one individually, we'll seek to bring out the whole thinking that is coming through from the various emails. So do bring them in, and we'll bring them in this first part of the program. Rob, surely parents have the right to do that. I mean, because what R.C. has said there is that he feels very passionately about doing something which he believes in from Scripture, and surely, and one of the things you were talking about was that this is the only place where parents can do well, but surely they have a right to do that.
I don't agree. I don't think they have a right to do whatever they want, even if the motivation for what they do is, as R.C. has said, out of a profound love for their children. Parents certainly have the right to attempt to transmit their deepest convictions and to share an intimate familial life with their children. Absolutely no question about that. But they don't have the right to act in the role as educators, to enroll an educational apparatus in the transmission of those convictions and beliefs as well. It seems to me, by contrast, that one of the primary functions of a schoolhouse, public, private, or homeschool, is to ensure that children are exposed to beliefs that compete with their parents' beliefs and that enable children to develop a critical capacity to question, perhaps revise, perhaps even to reject the beliefs of their parents. And the worry about homeschooling for me is that when parents can completely control the educational and other environment of their children, create a world for their children in which there are only values transmitted to their children which the parents themselves have endorsed and approved, that as children grow older, become teenagers, and then ultimately become citizens, they will be prevented from experiencing healthy democratic exchanges with those who may disagree with them profoundly about what the ultimate purpose in life is, but who from the standpoint of citizenship are their absolute equals. And I worry that R.C.'s defense of homeschooling compromises that view of citizenship.
Interesting, one of the first emails we've got in from Barry, it says that one thing homeschooling is the skill of socializing. How could this overcome this? And I think from what Rob is saying there, how do you respond to that? I mean, what he is saying is that they need to mix with people of other faiths. They need that input from that side to learn how to socialize. Do you think there is a danger with homeschooling and from what you are doing that everything is only from one aspect? How do you respond to that?
I think it's certainly a distinct possibility that parents could err in that way. However, in a practical answer from my own perspective, as a Christian, our Christian faith daily calls us to go out and to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ to those who are not yet a part of our faith. We have countless examples in the Scripture. Paul at Mars Hill, where he goes to the Areopagus, the very representation of the exchange of ideas, And he proclaims, again, the resurrection of Jesus there and the fullness of the gospel there. So, the Christian faith is all about getting involved. Now, let me, and to some degree, try to separate the question on the email from Rob's concerns, because I have a prepackaged answer to this prepackaged socialization question. That is the single most common generic objection to homeschooling. What about socialization? My perspective is this, that if socialization is the notion that my children need to learn to get along with people who are different from them, I think the last thing that I would want to do is put them in a room 7 hours a day with children who are exactly their same age, who live in their same neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My children, in our homeschool, they have people of different races. Because by the blessing of adoption, we have children of different races in our family.
Right.
We have a child that they interact with children with special needs because we have a daughter with special needs who's a part of our homeschool. My 15-year-old is interacting with her 3-year-old brother. My 13-year-old is interacting with his 11-year-old sister. And of course, not only that, but of course, today my 15-year-old is with me in London, meeting and watching and beholding and listening, just walking down the street, hearing all these different languages being spoken. And where were we just a few days ago? We're walking down the street in the middle of Gay Pride Day, wherever we were. Yeah. The homeschooling family, as a general rule, and again, I understand the concern, but the homeschooling family is out in the world all the time. That we're not shuttled off into a room in a building that's separate from the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. Our whole education is lived in the context of our lives, and our lives are always interacting with people from all sorts of different perspectives. Mm.
And that's the socializing, and I think that clearly deals with that. In other words, people that don't understand homeschooling can think you sit them down in the kitchen, from 9 till 5, and that's all they ever do. Whereas you don't. There is this going out, and there is this involvement. So socially skills maybe, but are there. But can we come back to this other issue, because other people are bringing it up here that has been brought. And in fact, somebody from Tennessee says, is sheltering children from other children with competing religious views, scientific theories, etc., a bad thing? I don't think sheltering children from harmful things is a bad thing. So that's celebrated. But is it? I mean, is there a place where maybe we should allow them to hear these other points of view so that they know how to handle them?
Well, in terms of practical wisdom on how to homeschool, again, I have no quarrel with me or Rob or you or anybody saying to a homeschooling parent, you might want to be careful that you don't smother your children. You might want to be careful that you don't have hothouse flowers. I think that's a wise thing. Although, again, we're left with, well, who decides how much? Right. The question from Tennessee also touches in, a canned response that I have. When people ask me, what about, don't you shelter your children? My response typically is, well, what are you going to accuse me of next? Feeding and clothing them? Of course I shelter my children. I'm sure Rob shelters my children. I'm sure if Rob walked in and found his children surfing the net and entering into militant, racist, bad stuff, he would say, that's probably not the best thing for you to be dealing with right now.
Might I jump in here?
Please do. Yes.
Let's get to the core of the issue. The core of the issue is the extent of parental authority over their children, and what kind of authority the state or agents of the state, like teachers or regulators, might have over children. Parenting is by definition about sheltering. There's no such thing as neutral parenting, giving your kid an unencumbered view about the world. Parenting is about attempting to transmit values to your children, different values. Let's take that as a given. The question that seems to me to arise within homeschooling is whether or not there is any function for public authority over an educational environment that is apart from parental authority. My claim is the following, that parents have very important roles to play. In fact, very deep rights to attempt to have the permission to attempt to convey their values to their children, to shelter them in whatever way you prefer to shelter your kids and I my children and Doug his children. But that when it comes to a schooling environment, not our roles as parents, but rather our roles as educators, and only in homeschools do the role as parent and educator overlap entirely. So that's why this becomes a question. When it comes to the role of education, should parents be able to play the exact same role as parents as educators? In other words, to attempt to transmit unencumbered their values to their children, to shelter their children from whatever they wish to shelter them from. My claim is that for purposes of citizenship, that would be deeply worrying, and that the state has an important role to play in ensuring that children receive exposure to and engagement with people who are at odds with the values you wish to transmit to Darby, in order that when she becomes an adult and goes to the voting booth, she doesn't think that the only way to exercise her capacity as a citizen is to vote her values without any information about what other people believe, whom she might disagree with profoundly about the ends of life, but nevertheless has to conceive of them as equal citizens. And if she never encounters them in a school setting, never comes to meet them in an educational environment, never has a conversation with them, she will become disabled as a citizen.
Do respond.
Sure,
please.
I'd be happy to. I would say that there's an even more fundamental issue at discussion here. And you find it in what Rob said about he's willing for the state to grant permission for parents to do this. What we're talking about here at the end of the day is less about education, less about child rearing, less about citizenship, less about voting. We're talking about authority with respect to the children.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my contention, well, and then let's find a nicer way to get at this, and that is we also have a fundamental disagreement about what is the nature of education.
Yes.
Rob is content with me giving my children trying to instill in my children these values, but not content for me to be in charge of their education.
Not entirely in charge.
That's fair. That's much better. Not entirely in charge of their education. And I'm saying, where did the state get this right? Mm-hmm. To give me permission. I mean, in America, when it comes to our fundamental rights, we affirm several things about them. We affirm that they're given by our Creator and not by the state. The state is not a grantor of rights. In fact, in our perspective, when we look at the Constitution, the Constitution's role is not to describe our rights, it's not to create our rights, but rather to restrain the government from getting involved in our rights. Mm-hmm. So I do not trust the government to decide what's an appropriate level of sheltering, or what is an appropriate level of or even to define what citizenship is. You understand that right now in Germany, people are being persecuted by the state because of this same perspective that, if we let people homeschool, they won't be citizens of the country. And this language itself, the laws themselves in Germany, were written in 1933 under Hitler. Yeah. Because the fear, what a bizarre thing. We have a tendency to think, well, fascists are Nazis. These are the people that want to impose their values. And here I am as a homeschooling dad. I'm not wanting to impose my values on Rob's children. I'm not wanting to impose them on your children. I wanted to be left alone. Yeah, and yet Rob is still taking the perspective that at the end of the day, it's up to the state to decide how much liberty I have, up to the state to decide how much autonomy my children ought to have, although we haven't even established whether or not, in fact, and I think it goes to the socialization question, whether or not, in fact, this involvement from the state or government schools or anything in between there, or schooling in a formal setting per se, is even going to fulfill the need that Rob wants. Mm-hmm. Where's the evidence that this autonomy, that this citizenship, that this goal that he has is being reached either by legislation, intervention that he's talking about, or in the government schools?
Yeah. You wanted to respond.
Yeah, two things that are quite important here. The first thing to keep in mind here is that when we talk about parental authority and we talk about state authority, I don't wish at all for any type of apparatus, a state apparatus, to interfere with your liberty as a parent to try and transmit your beliefs to your children.
Well, then we can be done.
What I wish to claim is that when you as a parent also act in your capacity as an educator, and in fact, when your children only experience you or your partner, your wife, as an educator, then there are new questions that arise. So let me also then contest, this is the second point, when you say the United States is created to restrain the state, to respect individual rights, I say that's absolutely correct. It respects your individual rights as a person. Your children are not your property. There are no familial rights under the Constitution. There are individual rights. Your children have individual rights as well, and those endow them with the same freedom of conscience that you have, which is to say that if your children wish to contest or reject or revise or argue with you about your fundamental convictions, about your Christian beliefs, they have, from the perspective of the state, absolutely equal entitlement to do so.
Well, I'm not asking the state to impose against my daughter's right to disagree with me.
Can we just develop this a little bit, because I understand what you're saying, and what RC will be saying is there is as a Christian there is a biblical right to bring up the family.
But the U.S. is not a Christian state.
No, neither is England. There's no way. But this is an interesting question, and this is where I just wanted to develop it a little bit for you. It says this is a question for you, but I think it's more than that. But it says, what is your position on atheistic indoctrination? For instance, take Richard Dawkins' summer retreats. Have you read? He's just
recently,
these summer
yes.
camps. He's going out. Which is clearly an attempt to proselytize children in an atheistic worldview. Okay, is this valid? Now, that's one thing, but the question I suppose that I would want to ask coming out of that is, if you really feel that you want to bring up your children in a Christian way, yes, at some point they will have the opportunity to decide or not, because you can't force them all the time. But is it right to send them to a local school where the whole tendency is atheistic, i.e. totally against what you are teaching? Isn't there a problem in that side as well?
There may well be. My arguments are not that homeschools should be shut down.
No,
My arguments are that our homeschools should be strictly regulated. And so I make no claim that a parent who currently homeschools his or her children must send them instead to public schools. That is not my argument. So the question doesn't even arise for me. The question is about what are the appropriate regulations for parents who wish to homeschool. Among the regulations I think crucially necessary are that parents not be permitted to expose their children to a curriculum that only reinforces the very beliefs they wish to transmit to them as parents.
And why? Can I ask, why is that? Because I know that statement would equally work on all sides. I mean, we're obviously talking about it from Christian's perspective tonight because of RC, but it would work from any perspective.
Correct.
But why do you feel that is the case, that they must not be allowed just to teach that child in the belief system that they have?
Well, for the reasons I stated previously, that for civic purposes, in order for the children to develop into citizens of a state which encompasses a great diversity of believers, some who have religious convictions and some who do not, and yet who must uphold individual freedoms in order for the liberal democracy to survive. In order for those children to act as citizens in ways that allow them to encounter people who disagree with them profoundly about the ends of life, the things that are most worthy about living, but who, from the perspective of citizenship, are their absolute equals, they cannot be permitted in an educational environment only to be exposed to that which their parents already believe. They need to be exposed to things that people believe differently from them.
Right.
Can I?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was really. Can you answer that and then
so.
develop? Yeah. If you're not, I don't know. Oh, whoops! Wonderful thing where we got. Yeah. But I mean, I met your daughter for just a short while. She didn't seem brainwashed or indoctrinated to me, but I mean, how would you respond to that? That basically your children, I know this hasn't actually been said, but taking it to its nth degree, you are just indoctrinating them in one way.
Before RC responds, one of the things which most bothers me about debates about homeschooling is that we proceed in the argument on the basis of anecdotes. I am willing to stipulate, for the purpose of this discussion, that RC's daughter and the rest of his children are magnificently socialized, are top academic achievers, are terrific citizens exposed to and regularly engaged with the diversity of the world.
And good looking.
And good looking on top of it.
Unlike their father, but don't worry about that.
Exactly. I don't want to make an example out of the anecdote of RC's children. What I want to talk about are the regulations that should apply to any homeschool. Because if we have a regime in Virginia or elsewhere that permits the spruels of the world to homeschool without any regulation whatsoever, though RC's children might be might register magnificently on any dimension you wish, there might be people down the street who escape the attention on every dimension. So let's talk about what actually happens in the average homeschool, not about Darby.
Okay. And would you have problems in regulations coming in? Of course, that then presupposes what the regulations are. But why would you have problems in regulations coming in? And how would you perceive that would change what you are doing at the moment?
Well, maybe to answer the question and go back to where I wanted to go,
please.
And I wanted to ask Rob a question. If my children, and I appreciate what you're saying, and I probably could parade my children around, and we all do this. Mm-hmm. Public school people do this. Private school people do. We all take out our best and brightest and say, "This is what we do." Yes, and and I appreciate the point very much. But let's just say at the end of the day, or at the end of my life, all of my children believe everything that I believe. Mm-hmm. My prayer is, literally, that they will do much better than me, that they'll be much more faithful to the scriptures than I've been, that they'll believe what God says far more faithfully than me. But if they end up like me, in your book, is this not a bad thing? And does this not necessarily imply that somehow I lack the civic virtues and that the government should be correcting me to make me more broad-minded so I can end up meeting all of your standards for civility and recognizing the equalness of all, et cetera, et cetera?
It's no sign of failure that children grow up to endorse the very same beliefs that their parents do. So if the situation were, as you describe it, that Darby grows up to be yet more faithful than you are, to carry out some plan of life that is more devout than you yourself have accomplished, so long as she autonomously endorses that life, which is to say, so long as she chooses that life and has a consciousness of the alternatives before her, where the consciousness is not just she knows that in some abstract sense others exist who endorse different things, then that's no problem whatsoever. The question is whether or not she's in an educational environment that allows her the opportunity to conceive in the first place of disagreement and differences about the way she lives.
So let's suppose that we're too late. Let's suppose that she's not aware of these things, and now she's grown up. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do with her then?
If she's an adult, it's too late.
You're not going to have a government regulation that's going to help her learn to be more autonomous at this point? I mean, isn't she in danger of not being a citizen as an adult if she's like this?
For the reasons you stated before, which I agree with, the purpose of liberal government is a restrained government, to respect the individual rights. So there are very, very weak levers the state has at its control or at its disposal to exercise authority over the citizens that are the composition of the state. One of those weak levers is the educational system. Once children have passed out of that into adulthood, the levers become even fewer. So unless she is somehow suffering grave harm or causing other people harm, there's no argument on my part that wants to impose some adult education system in order to make her into a potentially more autonomous person.
You see, I think one of the problems that I perceive, and actually I can see both sides of the argument. I have to say it's one of these debates where I'm not quite sure where I'm going in the final analysis. I have to say, I've been just trying to look through my emails to find one that supports you, Robert. I'm afraid I can't find one at the moment. I will try, but everybody at the moment is saying RC's right. I absolutely agree. Now,
it's a Christian television station, isn't it?
Not all seem to be totally Christian about it, though. But the whole point that I want to come in is what you are saying is there's got to be regulation because it's wrong for RC to take his belief and teach his. Now, you go into a school, whatever regulations are there, it's going to be the belief system of the teachers that's going to come through. I cannot see the difference here because the regulations say you've got to go to school, and I don't know, presumably it sets up a sort of curriculum. But we have here time after time where the teacher will bring in their belief. So what is the difference?
There's a major difference, Doug.
Please
There's
help
a major
me
difference.
see it.
I do not contest the view that schools are encumbered with values. The idea that any teacher also brings with him or her a value system which he or she attempts to transmit to children, sometimes quite purposefully, sometimes just implicitly. The issue here is whether or not the home environment and the school environment should be mutually reinforcing. So let's assume that your children, you attempt to instill in them a certain set of beliefs,
Yes.
and they go to a school in which the teacher is also attempting to instill a certain set of beliefs. The prediction I make is that even if you choose the school quite carefully, even if you choose a faith school, there will not be a perfect overlap between the beliefs of the teacher and the beliefs that you attempt to instill in your children. And so your child, navigating him or herself between these two worlds, will encounter some degree of value diversity, even more if they don't go to a faith school. And as a consequence of that, he or she will have to engage with the world beyond which they would have encountered if they had only been schooled at home by you. And that is the virtue from the perspective of citizenship. So I do not contest that schools are value-laden. That is the virtue in the entire process.
Let's bring this. It seems to be your main argument, and I can understand it, is the citizenship argument of getting on with other people. I see. Tell us, with your children, and we're not just making anecdotes of them, that they are real people, but you obviously have grounded them from a biblical perspective, and you've taught from a biblical perspective. Have you taken them out into situations where they, and I think you've already half answered this by what you said earlier on, where they meet other people of other faiths, and they do, okay, they're not sitting on the school next to them 8 hours a day, but they are in situations where that is going on. Does that happen?
Yes, but I'm sensitive to the anecdote thing. I will say this that's distinct about a homeschooling situation. My daughter, during school hours, can debate about the resurrection of Jesus with children who don't believe in it.
Yes.
If she's in a government school, no one's allowed to talk about that.
Right.
And that's a problem. But so absolutely that's true. But to get away from the anecdote, although it's still a little bit anecdotal, I've said many times that the moment I hand one of my children a book that I didn't write, and my children have read significantly more books than I've ever written, whenever I give them a book that I didn't write, then someone else, as you described, someone else is coming into the equation. Now, that person may be closer to me than you'd be happy with, but they're not exactly me. And the children are interacting, and you know, most homeschooling parents, get away a little bit away from the anecdote, they all have to give their kids books and choose to give their kids books that they didn't write. Now, to go back to your analogy and your affirmation about the level of the differences, don't you think it's possible that there are many government school educated parents who buy into a generic worldview that's grounded in government schools, who send their children to those government schools? And are you prepared to allow me to go and talk to these children about how God created the world in 6 days and Jesus was raised from the dead? Are you prepared to make that, give the force of law to allow me to do that so that they can become broader citizens and recognize my full humanity.
Yes, absolutely. I
You're-
would wish that.
You are, but whether the government, whether the lawmakers are, of course, is a different situation. But
You mentioned before Richard Dawkins and the new
Yes.
atheist summer
Schools,
camps,
summer
whatever
camps,
it is
yeah.
that he hopes to accomplish, hopes to put in place. It would be my wish that RC's children encounter in summer camps deeply atheist children, and that deeply atheist children head to the summer camps that RC's congregation sponsors. That would seem to me a positive development for the ultimate citizenship of all children involved.
But Rob, at that level, we're still at agreeing on wisdom in how to do these things. As I said from the beginning, I'm not against having my children read beyond what I believe. But we're talking about the force of law.
Sure.
Did I hear you say that you're comfortable with using the force of the state to give me or someone like me the opportunity to go into these government schools and present to them alternate views about creation, about the lordship of Jesus, the exclusivity of the gospel in Jesus? Is your position that the regulations that you're talking about that are going to affect me would be reciprocal in that way?
Well, I don't know if I think the law should allow you in particular to go into schools.
Because I
and
could
to
get some
present
good
these
consulting
Yeah.
fees on that.
views. I'm sure you could. I think it would be a healthy thing, and I would wish that the laws would cultivate, if not mandate,
Why the difference there? Because
Well, let
again,
me
I can
finish.
agree that we can cultivate this.
that there be a diverse student body, so that in a government school, in a public school, an agnostic, an atheist, a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim encounter each other in the classroom. And not only in the classroom, but when they're on a sports team together, that the background religious differences also are expressed and explored in a way that can be quite positive. So it seems to me yet another issue to raise with homeschooling, that homeschooling represents this self-segregation of believers from the rest of the population, when in fact those very believers can be a necessary resource, an important resource for all children in an educational environment.
Can I ask you, I mean, I was a governor at a school here for 25 years, and so got a little bit of understanding of what's going on in the education system here. And I have to say, I didn't have problem with other religions being taught, because at this point they were in a school where they were it was very much a multicultural school, and I had no problem with other religions being taught. What I did on a number of occasions stand against was trying to get them involved in the worship of that other religion, and that don't you think that's a good thing, though? And using this analogy of citizenship, of understanding what somebody else believes, understanding what their background is, not getting involved with it, but at least having an understanding of it.
Well, I would say, Doug, that the biblical perspective would be this, that as Christians, we're called to treat other human beings as bearers of God's image. And that is how we are together, equal before the law, et cetera, et cetera. The danger that I'm concerned about that could happen in what you're describing, and I think is more likely to happen in what Rob is describing, is that recognition is grounded in my commitment to the truthfulness
Absolutely.
of the biblical gospel.
Yes, yes.
And which means I believe, by the way, that those other religions which are believed by people who, according to my religion, bear God's image, those other religions are false.
Yes.
They're false, they're misleading, they lead people astray, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, I would suspect that, I wouldn't surprise Rob, that this wouldn't trouble Rob, but this is, again, where we do get very practical. How much other stuff does the regulation say my children have to get? How broad-minded, how open-minded does it have to be? Is it allowed to say... is all that Rob's saying is we need to make sure that all homeschooled children have a lesson in the equalness before the law of people who have different views.
But doesn't it come back, though, that I mean, my kids, I don't think I could have coped with homeschooling. from a practical point of view, I admire everybody that can. But my kids, we chose the school as best as we could, and I kept very proactive in the school, and I, on several occasions, we were up there, and they did have other belief system, but that wasn't in itself a problem to them, providing it was clearly defined. They knew what we believed, they knew what we said was the truth. They had to come and choose that for themselves. We couldn't save them. And therefore, I'm not sure whether you answered this, but what you say was, yes, it does depend on the level to which you go down that road. Was that what you were saying?
No. I would say in principle, I don't believe it's a legitimate function of the state, either constitutionally or biblically, one way or the other.
Might I add here then that I'm certain that R.C. would recognize and acknowledge the simple fact that he's a citizen in a country in which there are people of diverse religious beliefs.
Yes,
So
I can recognize that.
that's a simple fact. His religious freedoms to convey his religious beliefs to his children and to proselytize if he so wishes depend upon a consensus among many believers that the individual freedom that allow him to do that should be upheld by many. And what he is suggesting when he says, should his children be put in government schools in which they'll be exposed to people whom he views as sinful, as false about their ultimate convictions, and if Darby or his other children vote as citizens only on the basis of their religious beliefs and remake the country into a Christian country, a Christian political country, then he's accepting, it seems to me, quite dangerously, that if there were some other religious majority, a Muslim majority, a Jewish majority, that wished instead to vote its own beliefs into political practice, he would simply have to say, they have the votes, we are a persecuted minority. The individual freedoms which allow him to express and convey his religious beliefs to his children depend upon this very consensus and exposure and engagement and tolerance about religious belief as a citizen. And he seems to me to deny that.
I would actually flip that right on Rob and suggest, well, now, wait a minute. I'm not suggesting, again, I'm the one who wants to be left alone. I'm not asking for any legislation.
You can be left alone. The issue is Darby. But Darby should not be left alone.
I want to be left alone as a parent.
Isn't it a God-given right, and equally, of course, whatever that belief system is, isn't it a right to communicate your belief to your children?
I do not think the state should try to interfere in any way whatsoever with R.C.'s permission or aspiration or capacity to convey his beliefs to his children.
You would dislike
the school setting is something separate.
Okay.
The school setting is not the same.
Let me just bring this in. Hopefully we'll get on. Jane will be on in a minute. But
might I make one other analogy just to make this clear? I'm sorry, Doug.
Is it an analogy? All right.
Or one other example. Here's something that happens quite routinely. Should parents have the permission from the state, or should parents be permitted to say to their children, if you marry outside the tribe, we will disown you, not come to the wedding, not be dutiful grandparents? Absolutely, they should have that permission. No state should intervene and somehow try and prevent parents from conveying that if that's something of importance to them. Should the school system say to children, if you marry outside of the tribe of your parents, you will have done something terrible? Should it say that from the perspective of citizenship, you will be lesser if you marry outside the tribe? Absolutely not. It is of crucial importance that an educational setting say, whatever your parents tell you about whom your ultimate life partner will be, from the perspective of citizenship, choose whom you want.
Okay. Jane's on the line. You there, Jane?
Hi.
Hi there. Have you been listening to this debate? I hope you have.
I have.
You have. I bet you've been enthralled by it.
I think your guests are doing a good job.
Jane,
Both of them as well.
Jane, do bring your response. I mean, and especially, because one of the things which is very relevant to what is being said here, of course, the government is saying, at least talking about bringing far more legislation into homeschooling in Britain.
Yeah.
How have you responded to the debate so far? What points do you want to make?
Well, I think that Robert has some extremely valid concerns and questions. And, you know, I think, to be honest with you, that if that's one of his main concerns, then he has a lot less reservations about homeschooling than I certainly did a year ago.
Right.
I think, you know, we've had the education system and we've had homeschooling now. And, you know, just briefly with us, we had our son, who's, you know, in the UK we start our children in September after their 4th birthday. He started school. He was in a very highly academic, pressurized private school. And, you know, we saw lots of changes in him that were just really disturbing and really upsetting. You know, you nurture and raise your children for 4 years, then you send them off to school and they become a completely different child. And I don't know how it works in the States, but in the UK, although the government say that you have parental choice in where you send your children to school, it's a postcode lottery here, or a zip code lottery, as you would say in the States. But you pretty much have to send your child to the school that is closest to where you live. And the school that was closest to where we live is a failing school. If you drive past the school at 8:30 in the morning, the mothers are drinking wine and beer and alcohol out of bottles, and they're passing it around. There's a high number of children known to social services, and it's a very, very difficult school. That was our choice of school, and we said, no way, we're not sending our children there. And so, because there were no other options, we were forced in a way into homeschooling. And I think that, you know, a lot of the benefits of homeschooling for us as a family there have been things that I hadn't even considered, but I really felt like I had my children back, you know, within the family, and we suddenly got our family life back. And obviously I could go on and on and on and on about the reasons why, but that isn't really how your debate's been going this evening. But first of all, I think that when your children are little, even when they're in school, parental beliefs will always override teachers and friends. You know, my son used to come home and say, Mrs. So-and-so said this, this, and this today. Is that true? And I'd say, no, it's not true. Or yes, it is true, or whatever. Also, you know, as many of the viewers know, I have 12 years' experience as a pediatric registered nurse, and I have met many, many children who, despite being in school, have incredibly controlling parents. They control what they eat. They control who they spend time with outside of school. They control what they wear, what they watch. You know, very, very controlling. Almost on, I would say, an abusive kind of, you know, in an abusive manner. So I think that parents' beliefs do tend to override, certainly when they're little. I think that the other thing about the UK is, that, and this was something that I learned recently, is that you can actually write a letter and ask for your child not to be present in a religious education class. Mm-hmm. So if your child, you know, assembly or, you know, some religious instruction, if you don't want your child to be present, you can write a letter saying, dear Mrs. So-and-so, I do not want Billy in that class today, and that will be that, because that is your right as a parent. Certainly when my son came home with some reading material that I felt was totally inappropriate and totally unacceptable, we read the first few pages, and I decided, because I know my child better than the teacher knows him, I said to his teacher, this is just not appropriate for him, and he's not going to be reading it. Either give us another book or we'll find something else to read. And it was no problem, you know, whatsoever. So I think that even in the school setting, parents can still
input.
refuse. And as Doug, we've seen here in the UK, haven't we, where we've had, you know, Muslim children who have refused to, you know, there's been issues with like hot cross buns and stuff like that.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Jane, just on one other point? If there were more regulation, and we've got a number of emails, and I'm trying to bring a whole number together, but we've got a number of emails which do say we do have regulations, and of course the government are talking about more. Would you have problem with more regulations of homeschooling? I mean, I know that's a very difficult question, because what regulations are we talking about? But if they try to get more involved with what you should do and how you should do it, would that detract from what you are doing with your homeschooling?
For me personally, I don't think it would. I think for a lot of others they would. I think the autonomous home educators will probably be in for a rough ride in many respects. I think that, that even if the government said you have to follow what we have here in the UK called the national curriculum, which encompasses everything, similar to the education that Robert's talking about, I think that even if you did that and you had to study different faiths with your children, and if that was the law, then that's the law. If that's what you had to do and you had to prove it, then so be it. But I think that how you live your lives as a family speaks volumes. The fact that you go to church every Sunday, the fact that you pray, the fact that you go to the Bible for your guidance, the fact that you tithe, the fact that you pray when you're sick, those things I think speak a lot louder to children than whether you're just reading in a textbook that there is another faith called X, Y, and Z. And this is what they do.
Jane, Robert wants to make a point, and whatever you want to make, I would like the other thing, if you could just respond to Jane. Jane mentioned that school that her child would have gone to. We have an email here from Andy that says the state of education in this country is not neutral. In fact, it's anti-Christian, and there are checks, etc., on the homeschool. Would it have been good and right? You would have said, yes, you should have sent your child to that school, or how would you respond to that?
I think it's a red herring to talk about the quality of the public or the government or the state school. I'm going to go out on a limb. I
agree.
Haven't met RC until tonight, but I'm going to say that if the three of us could sit down now and describe for ourselves the ultimate design of a school system that would do everything we would wish it to do, and then I said to RC, it will be state-funded and state-administered, and it's located next door to where you live, will you send your child there? I'm going to guess that RC will say no. The purpose of homeschooling is not about a choice relative to the quality of the public school or the state school. The purpose of homeschooling for him and for many other believers is that the state should have no authority over children, and that we as parents have unencumbered authority to transmit our beliefs to our children. So the issue is not the quality of the public schools.
Can I say, I don't think it's a red herring for Jane. I mean, Jane went past it.
Very well.
So for her, it's not a red herring.
Very well. And in that case, my argument is not to defend the quality of the public school, but to say the state should do much better. And that if, in the meantime, as we struggle to achieve better public schools, better state schools, the better alternative for Jane's children is to homeschool them, she should be permitted to homeschool them with state regulations that ensure all of the civic purposes that I described before.
Jane, if it had been another school and it had a good reputation and all of that, would you have considered homeschooling at that point?
I probably wouldn't have done because I didn't know enough about it. And I think, that I've never really had a problem as such about schools. I think it was only when I started home educating that I saw the benefits of it, and also spiritually. As a family, there has been a huge change, spiritually in us since we started homeschooling. But I also, we go to a homeschooling support group where there are lots of other children. I think there's probably
sorry, not just the parents, the teachers, the children go to together. So that is part of the socialising area.
Oh gosh, I mean, Doug, they're socialising more now than they were when they were in school. I mean, my son was so unhappy. He had 2 friends for 3 years. He wouldn't go to any birthday parties. He didn't want anything to do with school outside of school, and that included birthday parties and all of that stuff. But that was just him.
Doug,
I think that when we go to the homeschool support group, there are lots and lots of children there of all different faiths, religions. You've got your
Jane, Robert's about to tell me it's an anecdote and he doesn't like them, aren't you?
Anecdotes do not constitute data. So your caller Jane would not be calling in if she thought, after homeschooling, my kid has become unbelievably stunted, has lowered his or her academic achievement, and seems to be doing much worse. she would not be calling in happily sharing her
But you
experience.
see,
So let's not talk about
I mean,
the anecdotal experience of anybody.
Okay, but we've had 30 emails here, so, and I haven't found one, and all of them are saying the same. So anecdotal but when does an anecdote, when is there enough of them to make it a fact?
Good. Okay, let's go there. It's a very good question. Does do plural anecdotes constitute data for a social scientist? So here's what I would then suggest to RC or for anyone else. Let's make regulation number 1 in any state that has homeschooling that's permitted, that if you wish to homeschool, here's what happens. You first register as homeschooling with a public authority so that the state knows that you are homeschooling and how many kids you are homeschooling. And secondly, that there be some state test that is administered for rudimentary academic skills on some regular basis, let's say every 2 years.
Right. Can I say, Jane?
Then let's. But may
Can I say something about that, Doug?
Yes, please. Can you just come in on the regulations and you can say
Please.
more? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, do.
Because first of all, we know that here in the UK there's lots of number crunching and number fiddling with SATs, yeah?
Yeah.
There's been lots of problems with that, with some children even being excluded from taking their sort of national test because they will do very poorly and they don't want those in the statistics. You know, there's been all sorts of things going on like that. I think one of the problems is that, you know, if a child's failing in school, it's the child's fault. If a child's failing at home, it's the parents' fault.
Yeah.
Because the parents are the educators in that case, if they're homeschooling.
That's right, exactly. But actually, you know, it's more that actually your child was failing in school anyway, which is the very reason that you took your child out of school to be able to go right back to a level where they could. Sorry, I'm not making sense. But for example, to give an example, my son with maths, he was at an all-singing, all-dancing school. Oh, look what our pupils can do. But he was really struggling with maths. And actually, when we had him tested, he was really far behind in maths than he was all his other subjects. The great thing now is that he's on much higher levels of work with things like English, geography, history, and the sciences. But in maths, we're on a much easier book. He has accomplished everything that he needs to accomplish. But if he was tested by the state for his age, they may say, actually, he's working more like a 7-year-old than an 8-year-old.
Jane, can I see, I mean, you're hearing this and we're hearing all this that is all anecdotal and that, but I'm not convinced that true anecdotes, i.e. things which are clear, aren't very important in this whole area. How do you see this?
Let me see if I can side up with Rob here against you for a second.
Oh, please do. I show how neutral I am.
I
anyway.
understand precisely what his point is, and I agree with it. But I do want to make 2 points. One of which, where we may get anecdote crossing over into data, or at least into policy. At the end of the day, the question is not, well, when we get these anecdotes, I want to ask the question, are these the people I want to have checking up on me? Mm-hmm. That the qualifications of the state to check up on whether or not I'm doing a good enough job is laughable in my mind. I've seen what they can do. That I'm not in the least bit interested in getting their approval for how I teach my children. Okay. That said, and this is where we would agree, if it were me, if I were made superintendent of schools and every standard in my own heart became the law of the land, I would still say it's not an appropriate function of the state. Mm-hmm. Well, let's say I was competent too. Mm-hmm. The problem isn't ultimately the state's weaknesses or its failures. Although, again, I wonder why people crusade to let to let the people who failed judge me.
Right. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the issue is still about who has the authority.
Absolutely.
And I mean, Stacey, we've had an email from that says much the same. She talks about the whole problem that there are in the public schools, and basically what right do they have as far as that is concerned. And
But let me.
if we could just say, I think there's a major difference here in the definition of wisdom. I presume the difference here is substantial. I would love to hear each define wisdom. I'm sorry, Patch. I'm not going to go down that line because we haven't got time. But so many of these emails are all saying the same thing, and which is basically that there is a failing system, and there's a lot of failure in the state system, whatever you want to call it. And the very point that you made there, and the very point that Jane made, I know my children. I know what they need. Now, okay, you're going to disagree with that. Therefore, I can give them what I know is good for them and bring them on, not just from the spiritual aspect, but from the practical aspect as well.
I don't disagree with that.
But you want them to be regulated by people that don't know them and have to do things. I'm not putting words into your mouth, I'm asking you, have to do things that they may not feel are best for their child.
If for Jane, the idea that the state would tell her, you need to convey in some curricular materials to your children historical evidence and materials about the existence of other people of equal citizenship who believe things differently than you do, to learn something about the demography of the UK, and that the meaning of liberal democratic citizenship in the UK includes something about religious toleration. If that's offensive to her, and she says, no, I cannot accept that type of material in my home, then I have a problem with Jane's attempt to homeschool. But if she says, by contrast, I know the needs of my kids best, and I know how the kid will learn better than the state could know, I would agree. Of course she knows her kid better than any teacher would.
Jane, and I'll let you go because we need to open the phone lines as well. Jane, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, no, I know exactly where Robert's coming from. Obviously, I'm in the second category because we foster vulnerable babies and children, and we foster for social services. So we live our lives out very much in front of social services. We have children living with us who come from all different faiths and religions. And one of the restrictions that we have is that we're not allowed to actually impose our views onto children. Now, obviously, if we were fostering children who were much older, then yes, that would be the case. But if we were fostering a 13-year-old who said, I am not coming to church, I do not want to come to church, we would have to respect that, and we would have to accommodate that. And of course,
Jane, why would you have to respect that? Because the state refuses to allow you to force the 13-year-old foster child to go to church with you?
Yeah.
So this is an issue about state authority versus parental authority.
But also, those children are not my children.
Yes,
that's
right. Foster
that's
children are different.
But nevertheless, you have guardianship over them.
I have guardianship over them, but their parents still have parental rights in the sense that, if they didn't want them to eat a certain food, let's say they said, I don't want them to ever eat eggs, well then I'd have to do that. I wouldn't be allowed to feed them eggs. So yeah, I do see where Robert's coming on that one, but at the same time, here in the UK, we have got the poorest. We've got children of 11 years old, the highest number of 11-year-olds who still cannot read or write out of the whole of Europe. And we have got bullying, knife crime. We've now got something called sexual bullying that's going on that I learned about on a training course last week. These are our future citizens that are very nicely coming through our school system. And another point that I found very interesting was that I was speaking to one of the coordinators for the UK of Christian home education, and she said that in the last 2 years, the number of non-Christian families that are joining the Christian education program to implement within their home has just gone, the numbers have just gone right up. And she said it's because people are so disillusioned with the education system here in the UK that they want core values and morals brought back into the family, and therefore they're opting to go with Christian curriculums, even though they are not practicing Christian families, which I found very interesting.
Yeah. Jane, bless you. I'm going to let you go. I know you could talk about this all night because you are very passionate about it as well. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to open the phone lines now. I'm going to deal with one or two of the emails as they've come through. Thank you for them. I'm not going to be able to deal with them all tonight. You've obviously touched a very real nerve, and people are wanting to respond. But the phone lines are now open. 0208 972 1408. 0208 972 1408. If you come on, can I ask you to be succinct because we haven't got too much time and I'd like to get through as many as possible. This is from Stones. Hi, please say hello to my two brothers who are with you tonight. For me, it appears to me that parents can teach their children everything else but maths, history, geography, etc. Where do humans' rights start and end? What is school anyway? It is not. Is it not the transfer of knowledge from those who know to those who don't? I think homeschooling is the best as children can be sheltered from the damaging stuff that are taught to our children without our response. Viva homeschooling from a concerned mother. Hi Doug, just tuned in. Homeschool is good. Train a child in the way they should go, and when they're old they will never depart from it. However, I think there should be some legislation, we finally got somebody that agrees with you, in place as the average homeschooling children slip through the net so that children can understand better society and the safety of the children. It's important that the legislation should come in on those areas. We've got some callers on the line, and the first caller, Mike. Good evening, Mike.
Good evening, brothers.
What can we do for you, sir?
I just wanted to mention, I don't know, I haven't been listening to the entire show, but as far as I'm aware, nobody has mentioned the Education Act, which says that the parents have it is the parents'
right.
Oh, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's the parents'
It's
right.
the parents' responsibility to make sure their child receives a decent education.
That's right.
Now, surely you're saying that if a child fails at home, it's the parents' responsibility, as your guest did mention.
What Jane was saying is that is what said. If the child is homeschooled and they fail, it's the parents' fault.
Yeah.
If they fail at school, it's their fault, not necessarily the teacher's fault.
But it is the teacher's fault. It's the person who is teaching the child. It's like the school can't teach a child what they need because everybody learns, regardless of whether a child or an adult, at a different rate. Mm-hmm. A child in a school, class of 30, gets taught like a sheep, all at one speed, because the teacher cannot physically keep up with every single child, which is not then given the child the correct education to their needs to suit their requirements in order for them to progress in life. Now, as far as teaching religion goes, we are a Christian country. I'm not saying that stops teachings of other religions, don't get me wrong. Yes, we should teach our children to respect other people, respect people who have other beliefs, whatever they are, but we shouldn't force them in a school to worship other religions, because we don't force adults to worship other religions. Mm-hmm. Why should we force our children to worship other religions like they do in school? Now, it takes a lot of guts for parents to go up to a school and openly segregate their children inside a class from saying, no, I don't want it to happen.
If I can just take that and come back to our guest. RC, would you agree with that statement?
Well, not only would I agree, Rob would agree. We're not here debating about government schooling versus homeschooling, at least...
Yes,
at least
but
you're not representing the government school position.
But
so.
in the school, and there are many circumstances, and I know of many, and I've mentioned my own personal experience of this, and Mike obviously has it as well, where Christians are forced to worship other gods. We had a recent case in England where a teacher was actually sacked because they're forcing them to worship a certain god. Now that must be wrong, surely. In any legislation, to force them to worship something they don't believe in must be wrong.
Well, I think we would, again, both agree with that.
Yeah. And you would agree with that as well.
So much the worse for England in that case.
Yeah.
Although, again, thankfully the system here worked enough that the teacher was sacked.
Yeah. That's right. Mike?
Sorry, I'll let you go. I'll keep it brief because I know you have other callers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. God bless.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, bless you now. Thank you. Do we have anybody else on the line at the moment? I'm not being told anything, so probably not. Let me do the phone lines are open. 0208 972 140. Yes, I have now been told. Liz, good evening, Liz.
Hello.
Hello, Liz. What would you like to say?
Well, I'd like to say we have a very good we have a very good relationship with our LEA.
Yes.
I homeschool my children, and we have excellent. Right down. We have excellent people who come to check that we're actually doing the work, and I think that's important, that there is some sort of check that things are being done, because there are people who will say we're home educating because they can't be bothered to get up in the morning to take their kids to school. So I think that side of thing is important. But to test the children, several of my children have got special needs, and to test them on a standardised test, I think would be completely wrong, because every child is at a different level, which has been said, several times tonight, that each child is different. And to try to squash a child into a box and say, because a child is this age, they should be doing this, and this, doesn't work.
Yes. Can I just put? I mean, Archie, can I put this to you first?
Sure.
Coming out of that, I mean, you as a Christian want to. Obviously, your teaching is very much for the Christian perspective, and that's, as you say, you share very clearly the scriptures at the beginning of the time. There may be other people, for other reasons, who are not Christians who want to homeschool. Do you feel there are some children that are better homeschooled and some children that would be better in the state system, or don't you feel that?
No, I don't believe that the state system will ever do anybody any good for this reason. That's not exactly the right way I'd put it, but what I would say is this. My view is that all education is inherently religious.
Right.
And that whoever's in charge of the education, whether it is the state, whether it's a church, whether it's a family, whoever's in charge will of necessity inculcate their own values. And the state, because it's not called, either biblically or, again, in our context in America, constitutionally, it's not called to inculcate a particular religion. It needs to stay out of the education business completely. Biblically speaking, the state is given to us to punish evildoers, not educate children, nor to make sure that children are educated.
Yeah.
It's there to punish evildoers. And again, because all education is inherently religious, even if my most heartfelt convictions were propagated throughout a state government system, I'd still say it was wicked, because I don't want to take other people's money or to take other people's children and use the force of the state to impose my convictions on those children. Okay. Now, very quickly,
yes.
Earlier Rob mentioned about how essentially what I understood him to say was, well, we need to lose a little bit of liberty in order to protect our liberty. That is, RC, you need to let my government bureaucrats look at your homeschool to make sure that your children grow up enough so that we can have freedom to homeschool in the future.
Because your children are not your property.
They are my children.
They're
under
property.
my authority.
They are
I know they're not
individuals
my
who
property.
possess liberty as well. They have the identical religious liberty that you do.
Oh, they most certainly do not have the identical religious liberty that I do.
Constitutionally, they do.
No, constitutionally they don't.
I disagree.
Yeah, you guys are going to have to argue about the American Constitution.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But let me one more quick thing about to go back to the
Please
issue
do,
of anecdotes and what we're talking about here.
We have another caller on the line, but
I don't like the idea of the anecdotes. But remember what Rob's given us: not anecdotes, hypothetical children.
Yes.
We have to have this government bureaucracy built to impose and to examine and to look at, in case some child might grow up to think that the Muslim isn't as much of a human being as he is.
Yeah.
And we don't even have an anecdote that there's any homeschooling family that's ever done this.
You have to give me a chance to respond.
Yeah.
If RC is willing to go with me to the state capitol in Virginia and say, you know what, anecdotes aren't good enough. We need a regulation system to determine how homeschool children in Virginia are faring. I will sign up for him and fly out to Virginia to go to the state capitol with him. But I will bet he will not be as supportive of any state regulation to collect data. Right. He will refuse
even to collect
collection.
data.
Sure.
Okay. Why you?
It's not their function.
Then he shouldn't make the point he does.
Have we got another Liz on the line? Come in here, please, Liz. What would you like to say?
Oh, hello, Doug. Yeah,
Hi there.
I've been listening to parts of this with interest. I tuned in a bit late. Apologies for that.
Oh, no problem. Glad you joined us.
I've got my son in a local state school, but he was coming home and saying to me things like, "Mummy, which God is the right God?" Now, pretty obviously, as a Christian and a follower of the Judeo-Christian heritage, I've not taught him about other gods, and he had that problem because of what he was being taught right from infant school. That starts at age 4 and 5, where they were getting them to colour in pictures of elephant-headed gods and things like that, yeah, of other religions. And I actually had to approach the head teacher because it was coming out at junior school. And I was saying, well, there's just one God. Oh, no, there isn't, Mummy. We've done it at school. Yeah. So I've been down the school, and the upshot was that I took my son out of RE, religious education, because that's where he was being taught this stuff. I kept him in the school. I'm in the PTA at the school,
right,
and things like that. So, I like to think that I have a reputation as being a supportive teacher of the school, right? But, I could have had the option of withdrawing my child altogether, but he had his friendships and relationships, and I thought it would be such a shame that he grows up and, not having any kind of feeling for anybody outside of our worldview,
right,
through his personal contact.
Interestingly, Liz, we've had a number of emails, and again, bringing them together, that have mentioned very similar things about the teaching of multiplicity of gods, and all gods are the same, and various emails concerning that. And interesting, though, you decided to keep your children in the system, in the state system, but at the same time to exercise your parental right in ensuring that things that you did not believe on a religious basis were taught to them. Does that sum up your position?
Yeah, and what I actually do is I go in every RE lesson my child has, and I do my own RE lessons with him.
Just for your child? I started
with Genesis, and I'm now we're doing about David. We've gone through it systematically. It's the school's actually told me at the last parents' evening that they actually believe that me coming in and teaching him one-on-one has really helped him.
Right.
So
right.
They're actually quite supportive of the fact that I'm able to come in and have a one-to-one with him once a week.
It's great. Here is a parent that's regulating the school. You're talking about the school regulating the parent. Here, would you see that as a very positive thing? I mean, she's going in there and saying, "Look, I believe this. He's going to carry on mixing with the children, but I do not want this teaching. Therefore, I'm going to go and teach them what I believe." How do you respond to that?
I think parents should be involved with state schools to the capacity they want. But I would say the question was whether or not all gods are equal.
Yes.
From the perspective of citizenship, this is true. All gods are equal. There should be no religious conviction test in order to assert one's citizenship. In fact, one could say, I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist, and I still am entitled to equal citizenship.
But I would agree. I don't think any of us are disagreeing that everybody's entitled to citizenship, but an equal citizenship. But surely saying all gods are not the same is not saying that they're not that they are lesser citizens. You're talking about their belief, not their status.
And that can be made clear in a classroom. So if RC's children are willing to be exposed to and to have conversations with people of differing religious beliefs, and if they want to say to them that you're sinners, that you're condemned, that you will suffer, that your beliefs are false, but I acknowledge your equal status as a citizen, I would be quite happy with that outcome.
I mean, your father is quite heavily into apologetics, isn't
Yes.
he? And that, I mean, has that rubbed off on you and passed down to the children that they are able to answer a number of these difficult questions and have opportunity to do so?
Certainly,
Yeah.
as God enables us, that's something that they're interested in, that we
Yeah.
teach them, of course.
So, you see, I've got an interesting. Liz, sorry, I'll let you go because we're rapidly running out of time. But is there anything, just quickly, anything else you want to mention there?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out in this country, parents do have the right to remove children from religious education.
Yes, that's
I've
right.
done it, and I think it's been a resounding success, and I would encourage other Christian parents out there
To
to
do
do
it.
the same thing, because if there's enough of us who do it, then I think the powers that be will take notice.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we shouldn't just let it go into multicultural mishmash.
That's
like
right,
that.
and yes, it's going to take a bit of commitment, like you, because this is always a problem for schools. They are fully stretched with staffing, so it takes somebody like you to go in and deal with that situation. But there must be parents that are willing to do that as well.
I hope there are, and I hope someone out there's listening, like that, you know, that maybe they're in a position to be able to do what I've done.
Great. Bless
Okay.
you. Thank
All
you
right then,
so
bye.
much indeed, Liz.
All
Thank
right,
you. Bye now. This is one for you, RC. Any parent who exclusively teaches his or her child young earth creationism is being totally irresponsible. Many homeschoolers do this. It's anonymous, but would you agree with that?
No.
Are you being totally irresponsible?
No, I don't know what exclusively means. I mean, we read books. We open up a book, and there it says, the dinosaurs died 1 million years ago, with my little 2-year-old child, and I said, no, that's not true.
It was one of the questions I was going to ask you. They actually read this. In other words, you don't vet every single book that you have so that there's no mention of evolution in any way. You will deal with it as it comes up.
I do vet every single book,
Okay.
but vetting it does not mean
No.
it must always agree with everything that I believe.
Yeah, right.
Of course not.
But so, in other words, you know what's in there.
Sure.
And you will communicate. So the fact that it says, it was 1 million years ago, you will then communicate the other. So they are hearing the other side.
But I'm apparently an exceedingly unusual homeschooler.
I found that out tonight. Doesn't that answer half your problem?
RC's children may be extraordinary, and I would have no quarrel. I'm willing to stipulate for
Right.
debate that they're extraordinary.
Can I say we got a minute left, or just over a minute, and so you've got about 30 seconds each to do your final summings up. Okay, Rob, what would you like to say to leave with the viewers?
The political consequences of the beliefs that RC has are dystopian in the extreme.
Can you explain that? Will,
Absolutely. RC believes that parents have complete authority over the education of their children, which is to say that parents, he would endorse a political arrangement in which parents who wanted to teach their children that electronic wires were the ultimate deity. He would not wish for anyone to interfere,
Right.
who wanted to shield them from learning literacy and numeracy, who wanted to insist that they only learned about the
Okay.
divinity of plastics.
30 seconds.
That would be fine with him. That's a dystopia.
Okay, what would you like to finish off?
What would truly frighten me as a utopian future is one in which the government ultimately decides what my children should learn, how they should learn, where they should learn, what they should learn. I believe that the Bible is what they need to learn.
We're going any minute now. Thank you so much, guys. Really enjoyed it. I'm sure we're repleted. Thank you for watching. The Lord bless you, and I hope you've made the decision.